Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you listening to this second Hit It and Quit It webinar series from Focus Consulting Group in 2022. And it's already starting out to be a rather strange and exciting year, isn't it? Today, we want to talk about the 5 big ideas for firm success. And I'm thrilled that I have the entire team here, the full tour de force Focus Consulting to help enlighten all of you on today's call. Let's go ahead and just jump right in with our agenda. So what are we up to? Well, today we want to start with from knowledge comes understanding. And so Liz is going to share a little bit about why it's important to have good diagnostics before you get started on any aspect of working your organization for improvement. Jim's going to help us understand that culture by design is far better than culture by default, and it really matters how you think about culture. Brian will give us some enlightenment about creativity and in particular, creating your future by intentional planning. So he's going to talk a little bit about the importance of strategy in having a great firm. Jamie's going to spend some time talking about how do you engage your talent one person at a time. We know it's a collective, but Jamie's going to give you some wisdom into engagement and emotional intelligence is critical for firm success. And finally, then Brian and I will be back to talk a little bit about key motivators of talent. And so what you reward for is certainly what you're going to get. So you want to pay attention, especially, by the way, in a hybrid environment and what we're heading into here in 2022. So without further ado, let me turn this over to Liz, my partner, who can talk a little bit about understanding.
Thanks, Keith. So I don't disagree with Peter Drucker as strongly as I'm hearing Dwight say false in my head, but Dwight has a point, and I'll get back to that. But first, I want to talk about Peter because we agree with Peter. You need measurement in order to manage. But what we know is that many investment organizations are managing key areas of their business without measuring it. And for investment organizations that are decision makers and driven by data, so many organizations are not getting and are making decisions on areas that really impact their people, their most important asset, without data. So why? When you're data-driven organizations, well, one of the big reasons that we hear and we have experienced is that people think that they actually have the facts, when in reality, they're working from opinions and actually treating those opinions as facts. And anybody who knows Focus knows us that, if you operate from a story perspective, you can get yourself into trouble and really limit your abilities and your effectiveness. So we actually believe in measuring an individual's experience in an organization, because it's incredibly powerful because experience is fact. Stories matter, but they come from experience. And to manage effectively and to make the best decisions possible, organizations need to operate from facts, not from the information you're hearing about from the loudest chirpers or the stories you're actually telling yourselves. It's cliche, I get it, but it's true. Information's power and truth is the key to success. And what we know and what we hear all the time is that it's hard for people to give their organizations candid and direct feedback. No matter how easy organizations make it or they think that their organization is candid, it's hard for people to do it. And so organizations are missing out on a lot of really key information from their stakeholders when they have to make really important decisions. So how do you get the facts? Well, a little shameless, shameless promotion from me is that you get an experienced consultant, right? One who works in the industry only, who has a database that is based on the industry only, who's been doing this for 20 plus years and who has tools developed for the industry by the industry. But another really important piece is get a consultant that knows that their reputation stands on the confidentialities that we hold. So for the past few years now, we've been away from our offices. People have been reevaluating their lives, what's important to them, right? And so it's more vital now than ever for an organization to know what your people are really thinking in those areas that can set you apart and give you a competitive advantage, right? Areas that impact your ability to attract and retain top talent, like intrinsic motivators, culture, leadership, DE&I, workplace flexibility, purpose, in addition to those key business areas like strategy and comp and rewards and succession, if you're going to be as successful as you want to be and can be. And it takes a very small amount of time to do so. So before I wrap up and give this over to Jim, I want to go back to Dwight, because Dwight says if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Well, correct. But we also think that you need to measure to leverage. Many of you know we believe what you focus on grows. So it's not only about finding your gaps, it's actually finding those things that you can leverage, things that set you apart, that are your edges and competitive advantages. So things you need to be asking yourself is, do you know what those are? Are you focusing on the right things? And are you telling the right stories because you're operating from facts? Jim, tell us about culture.
Thanks, Liz. I'll just say, to tie on to Liz, that the work she's done around perfecting our culture survey is really a treat, because that's my area of passion and interest. And our survey measures culture so well. And it's one of the highlights that I experienced to debrief with leaders, what their status of the culture is. So let's define it for a second. Over the years, we've been asked by so many clients, particularly now in the midst of this confusing pandemic, how do you think simply about culture? How do you boil it down so that you can keep it in top of mind? And what we found is that what we sort of call the hierarchy of needs here that people experience is really useful. So if you can't remember anything else about culture, remember that the people in your organization, whether they know it or not, want to be satisfied on these 4 levels. They want to feel safe. And that has been a big concern during COVID, because the health and wealth, both of them can be affected by this odd time we're in. So respect, DEI, these sorts of factors really play into, do I personally feel safe in the organization? So keep your eye on that. Belonging and connection is a step up from that. So I feel safe, I feel good, I don't feel threatened going into the organization, but do I belong? Do I feel like this is like a family of workers where we're all in it together? Do I feel that way? Do I feel connected? It's another key element of creating a healthy organization in these challenging times. All right, so I feel good. I'm a member of a team, which, by the way, if you're on a team and you have a good boss, it's 8 times more likely you'll be really highly engaged than if you're kind of off on an island. So 2 really big factors, belonging and safety. But I may not feel like I'm being challenged. I have a chance to grow. I have a chance to master my craft. And that's hugely important to people in the knowledge world. They want to do that. They want to get better. It's just internally satisfying to do that. But the top piece, and this is mentioned in Jack Welch's quote in the opening slide, what if I'm doing all that, but the organization I work for doesn't seem to be doing anything useful, or at least in my view of life, it's not anything useful. That's a big missing for people. So I have the first 3, and that's great, and those meet my anxiety needs over on the left, you see that? But the top one, the blue one, the purpose, meaning, that's what really transcends everything and provides people with a sense of contentment, internal satisfaction, like we do something useful. More and more, the organizations that I'm working with, my colleagues work with other organizations, their people really sense the purpose. And that makes it so much easier to do things like team building, hiring the right people, etc., because they have that blue level, which is the top level, in line. So I would say, if you get these internalized and you really think safety, belonging, mastery, and purpose, those are the 4 keys and his leaders or followers, keep your eye on those and see if indeed those needs are being met. All right, that's my definition of culture.
Strategic planning is a great follow-on to culture because an effective strategic plan is built one piece at a time. You start with who you are. You start with your culture. You start with your mission and values. Who are you as an organization? Then it becomes a little bit of a scientific experiment and a little bit of an artistic experiment as you go into a SWOT, understanding what are your strengths? Where are your weaknesses? What opportunities lie ahead of you? And appreciating your threats, things you really can't do much about, but you need to know exist. All of that starts to feed into the conversation of setting goals. What's our true North Star? What's our vision of success? Where do we want to be? And that conversation is not just management. It's management and key decision makers. It's key leaders in your organization. It's including, it's being more thoughtful and getting more voices in the room. Because as you start to develop the plan, you set your vision of success, you establish the goals, the things you really want to achieve, and you start to build down all the way down to the tactics. Those things that you're going to execute over on the next 3 to 5 years, you want as many voices in the room because you want them to look at that strategic plan and say, that's mine. That's not just leadership's. And as you're building this out, one of the key elements are two things. One is Michael Porter's quote about being differentiating. What are you going to do? How are you going to differentiate yourself from others in the marketplace? How are you going to craft your strategy to head you down a path that's going to allow you to be successful? The other part of it is considering your stakeholders. Is there something in here that speaks to your clients? Is there something here that speaks to your employees? How about your owners? And increasingly more, what we're seeing a part of it is society. How is your plan talking to society? How does it support society? Whether it be ESG on the investment side, whether it be DE&I on the employee side. How are you thinking about these things? How, again, you're including those voices in there. And strategic planning has always been important, never more so than in the last 2 years as we move into a hybrid environment. Because what you want folks to see is you want them to understand when they get up every day, what are they doing? How are they contributing to the success of the firm? And an important part as leaders is how are you communicating that? Is that in a town hall? Is that in constant conversations about performance management? What are you doing from a strategic perspective? So more so than ever, building it step by step, piece by piece is very important in leveraging who you are. Jamie?
Great. Thanks, Brian. So step by step, person by person, now we're going to get granular and take a look at the people who make up the culture, the people who are going to be implementing the strategy. And, the big question is how we as leaders can ensure that everybody's really engaged, highly motivated, producing their best work. There are a few answers here, and those of you who know us well know we've written a number of books on this. But what I want to do here today is just talk about one of them, and the one that we think is the most important, and that is helping to cultivate their curiosity. And it means creating a learning environment where, as Adam Grant says here, ideas are possibilities to explore and not certainties to defend. This is where we are open-minded. Easier said than done, right, in this business? But as human beings, back to what Jim was mentioning when he was talking about culture, we have these primary needs of feeling safe, approved of, and in control. And any or all of these can get triggered, and they do get triggered. And what we do with that is the big question. Now, if we're on our dance floor doing our day-to-day, we probably get triggered. One of these things gets threatened, we get triggered, and then we shut down because we know when any of those get triggered, the fight or flight response kicks in and our prefrontal cortex literally goes offline and we can't do our higher level thinking. So we've come up with this concept of the balcony, and this is where we say, the floor, that's the conventional thinking. If we can go up on the balcony, that's where we can do our unconventional thinking because we can self-observe. When we're on the balcony, we can develop self-awareness and other aspects of emotional intelligence, but just focusing on the self, what's going on with me physically? what's been triggered? How do I shift out of that? Asking questions, breathing. We've got all kinds of shift techniques we teach people to help them be on the balcony and do that higher level thinking. So in my opinion, this is the most important thing that we teach, is this ability to be open-minded. And if I were to add one more key topic around engagement, it's around personality type. And we've been using a system of personality called the Enneagram for 15 years. And bottom line, I just want to say, if you understand the personality type, Enneagram type of your teammates, you will develop far more productive working relationships and more effective. You'll have more effective outcomes if you understand each other, so that you can communicate better. So you can communicate at the balcony level, not on the dance floor level where you're triggering each other. So we have lots more to say about the people and engagement, but in the interest of time, Brian, I'm passing it back to you.
Thank you. Extrinsic and intrinsic rewards. The balance between the two is extremely important for a successful rewards plan. Now, I'm going to cover the extrinsic side, and I think your expectation is I'm going to talk about cash, and I will, but I'm going to channel my internal liberal arts major and talk philosophical for a second. Because when you think about the extrinsic piece, its success is how, thinking through setting a clear philosophy. How do we think about rewards? What is important? What is not important? And how do we think about compensation long-term? The second piece has to do on the thinking through the fair, transparent, and simple. So from a fairness perspective, how fair do I feel as if the rewards plan is in rewarding me? When I think about it from a transparency perspective, how well do I understand it? Is it clear to me how I'm being compensated ties back to the strategy? Is it clear to me from a transparency perspective how what I'm doing ties back to my performance goals? And a simplicity piece. How simple is the plan? Is it super complex? Am I really having a hard time defining it? Or is it super easy? I can talk to anybody, internally or externally, and map it out on the back of a napkin. Those three elements, the philosophy, the fairness, the transparency, and simple, are all key elements to helping folks feel fairly paid, but also having them see the extrinsic piece in a different light. Because I think one of the things we've seen in the last couple of years, certainly as we've been in the pandemic, is there's more to compensation than just cash. And I'll ask Keith to talk about the intrinsic side of rewards.
Thanks, Brian. I love this quote. There's compensation in all things. So let's talk about intrinsic. A couple of weeks ago, we published a vlog called "What Would You Do in Your Profession If You Weren't Getting Paid?" So check it out. It really is all about intrinsic motivation. And we tell the story of one person in particular who's intrinsically motivated. And that's really the idea of keeping your talent sticky. Cash is cash. Extrinsic is great. Extrinsic matters. But intrinsic is what keeps people in for the distance. And that's something that's important. Go back to what Jamie said a moment ago about different personality types. We are all intrinsically motivated differently. And the key to success is to identify what those intrinsic motivations are and be able to use them in your culture, in your strategy, right? And how you actually manage your talent. So think about this in two ways. Extrinsic is important, but intrinsic will help you go the distance. And that's really what we're trying to help you with here, is how as a firm do we go the distance? So you may have listened to these 5 things and you said, well, okay, nothing new here. We know that culture is important and strategy is important and measurement's important. That's the conventional. The unconventional is what you do with it. And that's really where we think the real differentiator is leveraging the unconventional thinking about how you reward people, how you develop people, how you bring people into your culture, how you propagate your culture in challenging times when we're all scattered among the, these different parts of life and parts of geography. Those are the unconventional things that will have your firm flying. So hopefully you've learned a couple things here. Check out our new website. Just want to put a plug in for that. And join us on March 18th as we talk about managing in a hybrid environment, talk about the unconventional. Hopefully, we are all getting back to some sort of blended working arrangement, and we want to help you get off to the right foot. So thanks for joining us. Thanks to my colleagues. We look forward to seeing you again. We'll see you next month.